Every morning, the classroom filled with noise. Children laughed, talked, and shared stories before the lesson began. Some showed their drawings, some compared their homework, some ran from desk to desk, excited to see their friends. But in the very last seat near the window, one boy always sat quietly. His name was Daniel. Daniel rarely spoke. He did not raise his hand. He did not join games during break time. Most days, he simply looked down at his notebook or out the window. Some students thought he was strange. Some ignored him completely. But one person noticed him every single day: his teacher, Miss Elena. Miss Elena had been teaching for many years. She had seen many kinds of students: loud students, funny students, curious students. But Daniel was different. He was silent in a way that felt heavy, like he was carrying something no one could see. One day, Miss Elena walked slowly around the classroom while the students worked on their writing exercise. When she reached Daniel's desk, she looked down at his paper. It was empty. Daniel held his pencil, but he had not written a single word. Miss Elena knelt beside him and spoke in a gentle voice. "Daniel," she said softly, "is something wrong?" Daniel shook his head without looking up. "No, miss." His voice was so quiet that it almost disappeared in the room. Miss Elena did not push him. She simply smiled. "That's okay," she said. "Take your time." And then she walked away. The next day, the same thing happened. Daniel sat quietly. His notebook stayed empty. Miss Elena noticed, but she did not show anger. She did not embarrass him in front of the class. Instead, after school, she sat at her desk and thought about Daniel. Teachers often see things that others miss: the way a child looks at the floor, the way they hold their pencil, the way they sit alone when others play. Miss Elena decided she would not ignore what she saw. The following morning, she arrived early. When Daniel walked into the classroom, he was surprised to see her waiting near the door. "Good morning, Daniel," she said warmly. He looked a little nervous. "Good morning, miss." She handed him a small notebook. "This is for you," she said. Daniel looked confused. "For me?" "Yes," she said. "You don't have to show it to anyone. You can write anything in it: a thought, a feeling, even just one word." Daniel held the notebook carefully, as if it were something fragile. "Okay," he said quietly. That day, Daniel still did not speak much, but during the last 10 minutes of class, Miss Elena noticed something new. Daniel was writing. Slowly, very slowly, but he was writing. Miss Elena did not walk over to look. She simply smiled from her desk. Days passed, then weeks. Little by little, Daniel began to write more in the small notebook, sometimes only one line, sometimes a short paragraph. Miss Elena never forced him to read it aloud, but every morning she greeted him with the same warm smile. "Good morning, Daniel." And every day, Daniel began to lift his head a little higher. One afternoon, after most students had left, Daniel walked slowly to Miss Elena's desk. He looked nervous. "Miss Elena?" "Yes, Daniel?" He held the small notebook in both hands. Can you read something?" Miss Elena nodded gently. "Of course." Daniel opened the notebook and placed it on her desk. His writing was small and careful. Miss Elena began to read. The first page said, "I don't talk much because I feel like nobody wants to hear my voice." Miss Elena continued reading. "My father left when I was 6. My mother works 2 jobs. At home, it is very quiet. At school, it is very loud. Sometimes I feel lost in both places." Miss Elena felt her heart grow heavy, but she kept reading. "Miss Elena is the only person who says good morning to me every day." Daniel stood silently beside the desk while she read. When she finished, she looked up at him. Her eyes were kind and soft. "Daniel," she said, Your voice matters more than you think." Daniel looked down at the floor. "No one listens," he whispered. Miss Elena shook her head gently. "I am listening." For the first time, Daniel looked directly at her. And in that moment, something small changed inside him. The next week, Miss Elena gave the class a special assignment. "Today," she said, "we will share a short story that we wrote." Many students raised their hands quickly. They loved speaking in front of others. But Daniel stayed still in his seat. Miss Elena did not call on him. Not yet. Several students read their stories. The class clapped for each one. Then Miss Elena looked toward the back of the room. "Daniel," she said gently, "would you like to share something today?" The room became quiet. Daniel's heart beat fast. He looked down at the small notebook in his hands. For a moment, it felt impossible. But then he remembered something. Every morning, the same words. "Good morning, Daniel." A simple sentence, but it made him feel seen. Slowly, Daniel stood up. His hands trembled slightly. "I wrote something," he said. His voice was soft, but the room was so quiet that everyone could hear him. Daniel began to read. It was a story about a small tree growing alone on a hill. The tree felt weak because strong winds pushed against it every day. But one day, the tree realized something. The wind was not trying to break it. The wind was helping its roots grow deeper. When Daniel finished, the classroom stayed silent for a moment. Then something beautiful happened. The students began to clap, not loudly, but warmly. Daniel's face turned red with surprise. He slowly sat down. Miss Elena smiled. She knew something important. Sometimes a child does not need pressure. Sometimes they do not need loud encouragement. Sometimes they only need one person who waits, one person who believes in them before they believe in themselves. Years later, Daniel would remember many lessons from school, math, history, science, but the thing he would remember most was a simple moment, a teacher standing at the classroom door each morning, waiting, smiling, and saying 3 small words that changed his life. "Good morning, Daniel."